Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you build and sustain a better creative business. Today on the show, we have my friend David Pepose, creator of Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel, and the new smash hit Kickstarter project, The OZ, which is on Kickstarter now. And also on Kickstarter now, today, is the launch of Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter Volume 2, and this is the first full volume in 5 years, the first one I've written since 2010, and I am so super excited, so I hope you go and check it out at russellnolte.com/Ichabod Volume 2. Again, that's russellnolte.com/Ichabod Volume 2. So pause this episode, go back now, and then come back because we have a really cool one for you. I've known David for a long time. We've become close friends, and I've been following his career since the first book of Spencer and Locke hit. I really think he's an amazing writer. I was thinking as I was reading I'm Going to the Chapel that he's going to be working for Marvel and DC one day. And after the smash $20,000 one-day launch of the OZ, maybe sooner than later. So it was really amazing to sit down with him, listen to his process, talk a little bit about what he's been doing. And as the new format has sort of evolved, I don't ask the same question that I've asked before. I would love to know what you think about that, whether I should go back to the old format, but I'm really enjoying it. And so I'm going to stop talking and drop you into the conversation with David, which is already in progress. My first question is the most important, which is, could you describe what a human being who is not Spencer and Locke would see if Spencer and Locke were to break into a room and try and take down a bunch of bad guys?
Yeah, they would see one cop probably getting his ass kicked, but then sort of like scrambling out of like the throng of the crowd and just like somehow overcoming the odds and just like beating the heck out of everybody in that room. It's kind of funny, that book, to me, like just that, like, you know, when Locke says take the wheel and, you know, he's hanging out the window and he's firing a car ahead of him, and meanwhile the car's swerving because of course there's nobody driving. But yeah, it's sort of it makes me chuckle, and I think it adds a little bit of stakes to that book because Locke may think he's got backup every time he walks in, but we know the truth, and we know he's in a lot more danger than he thinks he is. It's a mind over matter kind of thing.
That's so interesting because I always assumed that like the doll, the it's not a tiger, puma, jaguar,
the panther.
The panther, he would like throw it into the room with him, and like it would be like tied to him. But
yeah, he's got it like he's always holding on to it. So sometimes he's got it like sticking in his jacket pocket, and sometimes he's holding on to it. But yeah, it's yes, he's got that doll with him everywhere. And I can tell you that in our third volume, that's going to be a little grosser than he imagines. But yes, very excited about that.
I love it. Okay, so I think that for the people that aren't me and you, and people that watch that like have read Spencer and Locke, maybe we should go back and talk about what Spencer and Locke is, because this could have been really confusing to like a bunch of people who just dropped in the middle of this.
Spencer and Locke, the quick elevator pitch is, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? It's about a hard-boiled detective named Locke, whose partner is his childhood imaginary 7-foot-tall blue panther named Spencer. So I always say it's a little True Detective, it's a little Fight Club, and it's 100% a love letter to classic Bill Watterson strips.
And you actually, like, some of the art is actually done in that classic Bill Watterson style also.
Yeah, I you know, my artist and co-creator on this book, Jorge Santiago Jr., when we first started talking about this series, I knew I wanted to do Bill Watterson style flashbacks. It's a cool shorthand to sort of not only sort of establish what our influences are and wear them proudly on our sleeves, but it's a cool way of establishing time jumps and sort of weaponizing readers' expectations against them, because you start off with some of these like cutesy looking scenes and then they go off the rails real quick. And it's a little bit of a flex, that I thought, if I can work with an artist who can pull it off. Or actually, when I first approached Jorge for the book, I thought I was going to have to get another artist for the flashbacks, and he goes, "Oh no, I'm good." And I was like, "You're good?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I got it covered." And boy, does he! If he does not do the coolest Bill Watterson impression, it's not Bill Watterson. It's still got Jorge's style to it, but it's, where we're coming from with it. And we were able to take a lot of that very iconic imagery from the Watterson strips and kind of repurpose it for this really dark psychological noir story.
Yeah, and what I found interesting about the first volume was, like, it was almost as if he was looking back on his childhood, like we
Absolutely.
all do with these rose-colored glasses.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it's no coincidence that our first arc was called "You Can't Go Home Again," and it's very much this story of this very damaged person who's trying to make the best of it, who's trying to transcend their past and transcend their scars. But in order to do that, sometimes you have to look back, and sometimes you kind of have to go through the gauntlet. And that's really what the first volume of Spencer and Locke is. It's this guy sort of sifting through all the obstacles and all the traumas of his childhood and really coming face to face with that. And
it's amazing because you'll, like, often the strips often are at, like, the beginning or before you meet a character, and then it goes from, like, this, like, very whimsical Bill Watterson thing to, like, you see, like, Susie dead. And you're like, oh, crap, like, that is, like, a big jump. Was it intentional that you wanted it to always be, like, this, like, huge transition smash cut into this?
Exactly. It really putting the smash into the smash cut, just clothesline people, get them sort of feeling, lull them into a false sense of security and then pull the rug out from under them. And, the thing that we were doing, especially with Spencer and Locke, we opened up every issue with kind of a fake comic strip. The first page would always be set in either, for volume 1, the Bill Watterson style, or in our second volume, the Mort Walker style for Beetle Bailey. And what would happen is I think in certain ways we would ease people in a little bit because all of those strips ended badly. You'd start off thinking like, oh, okay, it's Calvin and Hobbes. That's neat. And then, like, our very first page, Locke's mom just hauls off on him. And so very quickly you're like, oh, this is a roller coaster. This is not. And then once that's been primed, then exactly like you said, we see Susie Durkin's dead. And it's like, oh, okay, this book's not taking any prisoners. And I feel like for me, establishing that kind of dark quality, and it's funny because Spencer and Locke, it's my first book, and it's also the darkest thing I think I'll ever write outside of straight horror. I think that kind of makes the redemptive arcs pop a little more. They say it's always darkest before the dawn. And I don't know, I kind of believe in that, I think.
Yeah, so you kind of moved that also into the second volume. What I found about the second volume, the difference between the strips was, it was about the bad guy was a person dealing with PTSD. Yeah. And what it seemed like would happen was you would see these Beetle Bailey strips, and then you would see, like, what actually would happen to a human being who dealt with that and had a sergeant that was like that and had all these horrible things. So you see it in this sort of, like, Beetle Bailey the funny way, and then the, like, person who would be Beetle Bailey has to actually deal with the ramifications of those things actually having happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, so our villain for volume 2, his name is Roach Riley, which, is our homage to Mort Walker's Beetle Bailey. And just like Locke is kind of an unreliable narrator in a way, because he has to be. He's hallucinating his partner and best friend. I felt the same way about Roach, is that, he has been so profoundly scarred, both mentally and physically, that when you see these flashbacks from his perspective, you're just kind of like, oh, he's not seeing the world that we're seeing. It's very, he's got, there's a lot going on with him. And at the same time, he was such a fun character to write because unlike Locke, who has to at least bear some semblance of being like a human being who can navigate society, although in our second volume, that's veneer is straining a little bit. Roach is pure id. He just does whatever he feels like he has to, but he also kind of sees himself as an artist. So, one of my favorite moments in that second volume is we had, all the police. We had the police chief on the roof with the spotlight. It's very Jim Gordon, except it has Dick Tracy, and the mayor is Les Moore from Funky Winkerbean. And Dick Tracy's like, don't worry, we're going to catch this Roach guy. We got a chopper coming in now. And then we see that the chopper's on fire and it's Roach just dive bombing this chopper into the police headquarters. And I was just like cackling when I wrote that, because we're able to sort of have our cake and eat it too. We're able to take like some degree of some seriousness, like these are real people, they're people dealing with real life issues, but we're able to sort of also have some very over the top moments. And Roach being this guy who he's just kind of pure action and is not holding back one iota. That's kind of fun and it's kind of freeing as a writer. It's just very, he was a really fun villain to write. And, there's only a small part of me that was sad that he didn't make it out on the other side of that book.
Yeah. I really love what you're talking about for unreliable narrators. Obviously, my most beloved property is Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter. Yep. And that came about when I said, a couple of things. First, I said, I'm not that great a writer yet. I don't really know what I'm doing in comics.
Yeah.
So, if I make this person an unreliable narrator, I could just explain away all of the issues in this book with just being he's crazy. So, yeah. Whatever. Yeah. Like any problem that I would have, just be like, oh yeah, that was intentional.
Yeah.
But it became the thing that people loved about the book, and it really started to become this sort of this a commentary on the Chosen One narrative. Yeah. And I'm wondering what you saw in these old Sunday funny cartoons that that attracted you to twisting them and putting your own commentary on them.
Well, so some of the worst advice that I've ever heard people say, because it's so easily misconstrued, is write what you know. And I think what it's supposed to mean is sort of write kind of what, if you've had emotional experiences that resonate with you. Nobody's saying only a CIA agent can write James Bond. But at the time, I did not know that. I still not really demystified a whole lot of the process of writing. And so at the time I was like, oh, write what you know. What do I know about anything except comics? I was like, I know about comics. And then the light bulb kind of went off and I said, oh, that's not as limiting as it necessarily sounds. So the idea of doing something that was a little meta, the idea came from who are two comics visionaries that I can slam together. And so I had first thought, honestly, I thought about classic Frank Miller, Dark Knight Returns, Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. Those books really resonated with me as a kid. And I really liked the way that Frank experimented with form and structure and pacing. You think of the 16-panel grid of Bruce Wayne's parents getting shot in Dark Knight Returns, for example. And then I thought, what was the weirdest thing I could throw up against some classic Frank? And when I thought of Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes, the light bulb just went off. I said, oh, Bill Watterson was a pioneer and a trailblazer and a visionary in his own right. He was working on such a smaller canvas, and yet he was able to fit in so much experimentation and so many different styles into it. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. That feels like a cool love letter to two just trailblazers. I mean, it also helped that I had a concept that I felt made sense. The idea of, when I was a kid, I have an almost 9-year age gap between me and my younger siblings. So I remember being an only child for a while. And I read Calvin and Hobbes as a kid. It was my mother's favorite comic strip. We still had the strips all over at my parents' house. And I remember enjoying the strips, but the one thing that always tripped me up was Calvin coming up with this imaginary friend. Because I was like, I was an only child and I came up with real people friends. That's what you do. So having this sort of living, breathing, such a detailed image of a best friend that you can interact with, that was a kind of a foreign concept to me. And then as an adult, when I thought about it, actually, this is sort of my guilty secret. I saw a remixed Watterson strip on Reddit. And it was Calvin doing his homework, and Hobbs walks up to him and says, "Hey, Calvin, you want to go outside and play?" And Calvin goes, "No, I can't. I got to finish my homework." And Hobbs goes, "Really?" And Calvin goes, "Yeah, Mom put me on some Ritalin. She says it's really helping." And then the last panel is Calvin doing his homework and this doll just sitting there like lifelessly. And it was one of those laughs that it was like half shock. And then I realized like, oh, that kind of makes a lot of sense, that having something so, maybe this isn't just like a charming quirk. Maybe this is a symptom of a deeper pathology. And once that image kind of clicked, then seeing, what would he look like as an adult? Then it started getting real sinister real quick. And the story really just kind of poured out of me. The first volume of Spencer and Locke is still the fastest thing I've ever written. I think I wrote that outline in a week. And I think I wrote the entire series in less than 2 months. So yeah, it's my baby. It's my firstborn. I love that series to death.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shows. And as you were talking, I always forget that, like, you spent 10 years doing comic reviews and, like, you know a lot about comics and, like, the history of comics and all of those things, specifically, like, in very specific detail. Like, I know The Dark Knight Returns. I don't remember that 16-panel grid that you were talking about. I mean, once you said it, I was like, oh, yeah, I do remember that grid. But, like, I couldn't have just pulled that out of my head. How do you think doing all of those comic reviews like influenced your work, or all of the comic stuff that you did?
Well, yeah, it really it was a 1-2 punch for me, because I got my start in the industry as an editorial intern at DC. And that kind of introduced me to a little bit of like the pipeline of all the different moving parts that it takes to put a comic together. And then I really built on that foundation for 12 years as a reviewer at Newsarama. I actually just finished my last week there just before my Kickstarter campaign. And I like to say I learned so much that it was barely enough to get my first book across the finish line. Because you get to learn a lot, but it's very academic. And so you have to then put that into practice. I think I learned just as much, if not more, making my first comic than I did through a decade of writing reviews. But the reviews did help. I think it really helped me kind of establish my voice and the things that I liked and didn't like much faster, because just like you got to put in your reps and you got to keep writing, and some of the stuff you write is crap, which I did. I was writing plenty of short scripts that were terrible and no one will ever see them. But I had the added benefit of learning from other people's mistakes and learning other people's tricks. So, for example, when I wrote Spencer and Locke, 2 books that really had popped out to me at the time, there was Moon Knight that was coming out that was like super intense, and each issue was standalone. And, Moon Knight was super menacing. And Batgirl, which meanwhile, those were also done in one stories, but very densely paced. And in a way that both of them were both very accessible. You could pick up one comic and get, if not a full story, a satisfying chunk that still had like a beginning, middle, and end. And those things really influenced my voice. Whereas things like a lot of the more decompressed books, the ones that they're sort of firing this kind of Sorkin-esque dialogue, those don't really capture my attention. And so that's something that I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or if I do sort of that rapid fire back and forth dialogue, it's got to be very specific and very deliberate. But yeah, and I think the other thing that really helped me out, and I think this has been important for my process as a writer, is having a circle of people that I trust. And my reviews crew, some of my best friends are on that review team. And so being able to hit up, my friend George Marston or my friend Pierce Lydon and say, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think? And if in case anybody's wondering, they're just as brutal with me as they are with anybody else's books. Half the time they're like, you just invented the movie Armageddon, or you just invented the movie Inception, or that idea sucks. I don't like it. And that kind of gives me a chance to recalibrate a little bit and say, okay, is it because they're right? Or is it that they didn't get it? Or is it that I didn't explain it in the right way? And yeah, I think kind of running that gauntlet and doing it every single day or almost every single day for 12 years it really became it really got hardwired into my brain, and I think it really helped me establish my voice as a writer.
Well, on top of that, it must have been very helpful when the book came out. I mean, you had a big, deep bench of like people who were more than most creators who make their first book. You had a wide range of like other creators who you had reviewed. You had other places. You were part of like the press, so you knew how they operated. You knew how to talk to them. You knew how to reach out and what they wanted and what they didn't want. And when people like, wow, how did like the book's great. Like, there's nothing about the book, but like, there's a lot of great books that I read, and I'm like, why does nobody know this book exists? I don't understand. It's so great. And one of the things that I think was so, like, from the first time I met you was like, you A, had the pitch, you B, had like the cred, and C, like, you just seemed to know how the system worked, where most first time creators do not. And so I would love you for you to talk a little bit about how that affected sort of the launch of the book, or like how it like the meteoric seemingly rise to like of success that it had compared to most other books that are like maybe not equally good, but like, you know, the very high quality.
Absolutely. Well, you know, so one thing I want to add is that, you know, while I was, you know, I had gone from DC and I was moonlighting at Newsarama, I was still I had worked a number of press related day jobs. I was a newspaper reporter for several years, and then I wound up working in publicity at CBS in New York for their network shows. And you know, my experience at CBS was really formative in a way, and really kind of the scales were lifted from my eyes, so to speak, because look, you're watching CBS shows, and I'm not gonna lie, they're usually as formulaic as it gets, right? It's not, you know, it's not Mammoth, and like, for example, The Big Bang Theory was like the most popular comedy for years while I was there, you know, and so my job at CBS, among many, was I was writing and editing all the ratings press releases. And so I worked with our research department, and it made me realize that you can have the most interesting piece of material, the best written, the most clever, the most beautifully acted, and it doesn't matter if nobody knows what it is. And so I, you know, having worked with the publicity team, and actually before I left, they had just launched Supergirl on CBS before it moved to the CW, and I helped them build a press list off that in the nerd press, and that was a really formative experience for me. You know, I think there are a lot of, and I don't know if this is the case with the colleagues that you work with, but at least for the books that I've worked with, every artist I've worked with is fairly introverted. They're going to kind of just do their own thing. They're not really going to sort of advocate for themselves. And I feel like then for me as the creator, that becomes my responsibility. You know, I'm the one that kind of pulled them into this. So the least I can do is make sure that people are seeing their work. So having been on both sides of the publicity table was absolutely it was key. You know, I knew how to write a press release. I knew how to look on a comic news sites to find contact information, which is something that if you've never done it, it can seem insurmountable, let alone the idea of having like a Google Doc with names and email addresses. And on top of that, I do think that I had a distinct advantage having come from Newsarama, not because, you know, what's interesting, I didn't know a ton of the other comics journalists when I was out there. I knew Albert Ching at CBR because he had been a Newsarama alum, but most of the sites I just knew through reputation. But that was enough. I was able to say, hey, you might not know me. I'm David Pepose. I write reviews over at Newsarama. I'm actually taking the plunge with my first creator-owned book, and I've read your site for a long time, and I wanted to see if there's any way we could chat. And, you know, I feel like I've had a lot of close friendships amongst the comics press, and it's because we've all been in those same trenches together. You know, people like David Brooke over at Adventures in Poor Taste, or Zach Quaintance over at The Beat. You know, Albert Ching's no longer at CBR. Now he's at DC, but, you know, I still consider him a friend. You know, the more you talk with press, I think the easier it can be to kind of have that camaraderie. But I think by virtue of having been in the same trenches, I do think that I've had an advantage, just of sort of, being able to get to know people. I should mention Brett Schenker at Graphic Policy. I knew I was leaving somebody out. But yeah, also for me, having been hit with the fire hose of comics press 24/7, I kind of know like there are certain things you need to do to convince a stranger to read your book. I can't tell you how many emails I would get of just somebody being like, "Hey, Chris Arndt said that you write reviews. Here's a link." I'm like,
so
I don't know.
What is a good thing? What makes something stand out when you get it?
Yeah, for me personally, and this again, take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure there are going to be people who tell you something else. For me, I like being able to get your pitch down, especially in a headline. You get so many things, and if you don't know what this book is about, you might not open the email, or you might open it and auto forward it and not really think of it again. Artwork, I think, is crucial. And that is something that I think a lot of pros, even pro publicists, are not doing at their peril. Valiant, I believe, it used to include art in their press releases. I don't know if they still do or not, but that was always really helpful to me, because there are so many books that sound, they might sound a little forgettable when it comes to the concept, but if you look at the art and that really pops out at you, for me, at least as a reviewer, and this is my experience, and I don't know, I'm not speaking for the whole reviewer community, but I can only speak for myself. The worst thing is either seeing a book that is just purely middle of the road, that you don't really have anything to say positively or negatively about it, or seeing an indie book that is just not ready for prime time. I kind of made it a point that I didn't want to punch down on somebody who, it's not worth their time or mine, to have them go up to a big spotlight like Newsarama just to get trashed. But I do distinctly remember, and this is kind of a deep cut. It's a 10-year-old cut, but I think it's illustrative. Marjorie Liu and Daniel Way had a Wolverine spinoff starring Wolverine's son. It was called Dark Wolverine. It does not sound particularly interesting when you hear it like that. However, and I'm going to butcher his name, Giuseppe Camuncoli was drawing it. This was his sort of big Marvel debut. He had been kind of working in almost obscurity, working on Hellblazer that was not getting a ton of traction. And I remember seeing a preview for it, and it really I was like, this book looks really cool. And so I wound up giving it a shot, and I raved about it because I loved how much the art was. And now Camuncoli is working, I think it's on Undiscovered Country with Scott Snyder right now, unless I'm totally misremembering it. But it's one of Image's biggest books right now. So artwork, I think, is key. Being able to distill your pitch is key. Dropbox links. Do not send WeTransfer files. I hate WeTransfer files. Don't try to send a bunch of attachments. They're going to get stuck. You can't forward them to people. Dropbox links are the way to go. And having your full creative team listed. I think beyond that, it is a crapshoot. It's a numbers game. You want to hit as many people as you can, but you also want to be personal with it. You can tell pretty quickly if it's a form letter. I've certainly gotten my fair share of them. I've certainly gotten my fair share with my name wrong. Or my site wrong. Don't do that. That's immediate go in the trash. But you would be surprised that, and I don't say this to denigrate any comics creators, but that's just not the skill set. That's not the skill set that they pick up. And I think it's by virtue that I've worked in other jobs besides comics that I was fortunate enough to have developed those skills, because they really are universal, no matter what field of art that I think you do.
Absolutely. I mean, I love what you talked about, like, being personal. Hi, David. Like, I read your review of this really cool thing, and like, I think that you would really enjoy this new thing that I did. Here is the one sentence log line, and your log line is six words.
Yeah.
It's Calvin. It's Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's easy. It's one line, and it's not that, like, I mean, I like doing mashups, so like my pitches kind of lend themselves to that. But being able to just get it down in a sentence, maybe two, you need to do that. If I'm of the opinion, if you can't figure that out, I don't think it's usually the story. Like, I think most stories you can break down that way, but you really need to think about it because, we love our stories, right? We're storytellers. We've put blood, sweat, and tears into this work. So it's our babies. We can't not love it. But a stranger doesn't care. Unfortunately, kind of the way we see entertainment, we see it as disposable. I think even creators do. I think if we thought about all of like the pain and effort it took to make like one forgettable TV show, we'd be like screaming in horror in the corner.
Oh, absolutely. And I always tell people, like, it's rampant in authorship. It's less so in comics, but it's rampant in authorship where like someone will spend months making a book. And then they'll spend a week launching it, not launch it that great, and then they'll move on to the next book. And I'm like, you just spent, like, what a waste of your life. Like, you just are like, you're not, like, and I really learned this with Ichabod. You probably learned this with Spencer and Locke, like, for real. But for me, I was like, 10 years. I'm like, literally talking about Ichabod for 10 years. And, like, all of that effort went into 2 years of it. And then for 8 years, I've just been marketing it.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's first off, especially with your early books, those are going to be your calling cards for a long time. Spencer and Locke came out. I still can't believe it. It feels like it's been 10 years, but it's only been 3. But I still talk about it regularly, knowing your book and knowing how to describe it to a stranger. I think that is storytelling. Storytelling is, how do I make a stranger care?
Well, and one thing that they need is a totem, like a grounding place, kind of like in Inception. You're like, okay, I've got a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
And like, they still want to know, like, where do I go? Like, this is so overwhelming. Like, where do I go? And your job still, as you grow in your career, is to still be like, all right, this Ichabod or Katrina or like whatever the totem ones are, it's like, get them into the totem and then let them discover the rest of it. But like, don't give them 1,000 options. Give them the ones are the massive hits. Yes. And if they become if all they do is follow your massive hits, awesome, great. Yeah. They're still going to be massive hits, but but some of them will trickle down and become like super fans, loving all of your other stuff. But when I talk about Brian K. Vaughan, I don't bring up Ex Machina. I talk about Y the Last Man and Saga, and I don't talk about his. I was like, go find that other stuff. But like, if you don't like Y the Last Man or Saga, you're not going to like him. You're just not going to like Brian K. Vaughan.
Although it's interesting you say that, because I bet Brian K. Vaughan for a long time, until Saga came out, his calling cards were Y and Ex Machina, and so it's interesting. I mean, I think once you hit a certain level of that career for a certain longevity, then eventually, you start building bigger and bigger hits. And then some of those early hits become not footnotes, but they become secondary. But I think especially like, at least at the level that I'm at, if you can kind of come out the gate swinging, then people are going to remember that. And that's going to be the benchmark that everybody compares the rest of your work to. And I actually like that. I find that to be very helpful for me in terms of marketing my work and marketing myself as a creator, because I don't like being put in a box, and I kind of like to tweak people's expectations a bit. So like the very next book that I did after Spencer and Locke was a rom-com.
I want to talk. Let's move to that. This is a perfect segue. Like,
perfect segue.
It's almost like you have worked in media, people. You have your first book.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that you had a Peposian like style.
Yeah.
That until I read Going to the Chapel, and when I read Going to the Chapel, I was like, oh, I kind of see how you you evolved this and you moved this and you kept this going. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about like sort of what it meant to do the second project, like what you focused on, like what you brought over, how you thought about all of those elements.
Sure.
Because I found it very hard until actually quite recently to be like, that's what makes a Russell Nolte book. I see it. I've now done 20 projects. Like I know like these are the elements that go into the special sauce. So did you have that idea going in, what to keep and what to move? Like, cause it's kind of in the same genre and as Spencer and Locke in like a way, but it's also massive divergent as well.
Yeah. Well, so Going to the Chapel, for those of you who haven't read it, it's Die Hard meets Wedding Crashers. It's about a wealthy bride who's grappling with a case of cold feet on the day of her wedding, and she's about to say something until her wedding is crashed by a gang of Elvis-themed bank robbers who are looking for a priceless jewel necklace on loan for the event. Unfortunately, the Bad Elvis gang did not account for this bride's dysfunctional family, so the heist is immediately botched, and the police swarm the chapel, and suddenly everybody's in a hostage situation. So it's really the story of this bride becoming the ringleader of her own hostage situation to try to get out of walking down the aisle.
Well, and the way that you did it was very interesting. I don't know if it's it's pretty early in the book, but I don't know if it's like a giveaway moment, but how you connected all of the pieces to make it relevant was quite a bit more interesting than I thought it was going to get in this book.
So I said Spencer and Locke was the quickest thing I've ever written. I've never written anything that fast again. Chapel's the slowest thing I've ever written. I wrote and rewrote that outline probably a dozen times because there's a lot of moving pieces that went into that book. It's 16 speaking roles all in one location. And the way that book came about, and I don't know if this is the case for you, Russell, or not, every time I write when I wrote the first Spencer and Locke, I had like a bucket list of things that if I never wrote another comic again, I would be happy with this being the only one. Because if you write Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City, that's a high concept that you either succeed or you fail, but you do it loudly. So I was convinced I might be run out of the industry any moment. The problem is that I finished Spencer and Locke and I suddenly had a brand new bucket list. And that I've found every time I write a book, I check a few things off the list and I add a bunch more on. And so for when I finished the first Spencer and Locke, and again, I love this book. It's my firstborn. I'm really proud of it. One of the things that I thought was it's a very small cast. It's very tight. It's very intimate. It's street level. It's one man's psychological journey. So I wanted a big cast for the next book. And I thought it would be a unique challenge to have it set mostly in one location. And the way that the story came about was I was the best man at my oldest friend's wedding, and I did a terrible job at it. It was circumstances out of my control. I wound up in the hospital with a kidney stone right before his bachelor party, so I missed the whole thing. But the bachelor party was cursed, and so I had to troubleshoot it from the other side of the country. And I thought, oh man, at least it didn't happen during the wedding. And then I thought, oh, but what if it did? And so that's how the story kind of snowballed. And for me, I always feel like, and this is a conversation you and I have had before, is that on the one hand, I want to stretch different muscle groups because I get restless and I want to keep growing as a creator. On the other hand, I want to have something that there's at least some sort of tenuous connection from one book to another. They don't have to be consecutive books, but just being able to say, oh, hey, the seed starts with Spencer and Locke and then kind of branches out into different things from there. So, Chapel was kind of also my way of saying hey, I'm not just going to write super bleak stuff. I want to write something that's a little lighter on its feet and something that's a little funnier. I want to write stuff that doesn't have narrative captions because I worry that I could easily use that as a crutch. And just trying different genres, trying rom-coms, trying a little bit of Westerns in there, being on the other side of the law with the bad guys this time. So yeah, it was that bucket list. I think to answer your question though, about what are the things that I keep, I think for that, a lot of that is structural, and I'd say thematic. Rick Remender, I consider to be a big influence on me in terms of the way he paces things out. I really like the way that he handles action, which sometimes I think can be seen as an afterthought by a lot of creators in the direct market. So he's very specific and very deliberate about it. I like to add in little things like makeshift weaponry. That's always a thing that I don't know why I like it, but I like it. And the other thing is characters dealing with trauma. And granted, there's a wide gulf of distance in terms of tone between Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel. But at its core, Detective Locke and Emily Anderson, the bride at the center of the story, they're both traumatized figures who have to kind of confront that. Locke having been sort of the victim of this horrific childhood. But Emily, the whole reason why she has these commitment issues is because her heart was broken. by Tom. She thought she had met somebody that she had a really profound connection with, and then he vanished. And we find out later kind of the reasons why that was. It's not as black and white as she thought, but those are scars that have carried with her all the way to the day of her wedding. And it's funny, my thinking on it has evolved a bit since the first Spencer and Locke. The first Spencer and Locke, I thought trauma and our scars and our past shape who we are. It shapes our personalities, and it shapes, how we approach different situations. And, can we transcend that? Can we overcome that? Or are we going to be defined by that? I think sort of going to the chapel, and now with my new book on Kickstarter, I think our traumas are those are the defining journeys and struggles we each have as human beings. These are the things that for our entire lives we're going to struggle with, whether or not we can succeed in sort of overcoming them, or whether we spend our lives trying to escape them, or our lives trying to bury them and pretend they're not there. That, I think, really defines our life journeys. And sometimes it's circular, and sometimes we keep coming back to that same thing. And sometimes it's sort of more long lasting over the continuum. But I do feel like that is a good way to sort of explore characters, to make them engaging and sympathetic to readers. And I think it's even a little cathartic to our fans.
I want to talk about the new project, but before I do, I want to answer the question that you asked, or that you brought up about how I design stuff now.
Yeah.
I have done pretty much all of my bucket list things that I've ever wanted to do. For a long time, well, until I was 36, thought I was going to die at 35. So I was very, very concerned with having a career's worth of work until that time.
Sure.
And I feel like I've had that. Like I'm writing my 20th book right now. I've done tons of comic stuff. Would I like to do more? Of course, I want to do all sorts. But now my goal is to design projects that I can be in for years, and to be able to withstand my desire to kitchen sink things and throw a bunch of stuff in. So I've been working on this secret project. I don't have cute names like you. I just call it Secret Project. But like my goal in designing it was like, okay, I really like space fantasy, but I also like epic fantasy, and I like urban fantasy, and I want them all to exist in one world so I can just send people to this one thing.
Yeah.
Like I like snappy dialogue. I like multiple characters to be. I want to be able to change who the point of view characters are in each story, so it can like grow and evolve and do all of these things.
Right.
So like my process now is really at the beginning. Like how can I be in a world for. I was actually doing this research before for comics, and I was looking at all of my favorite comics and like how long they ran for, and almost all of them ran for 60 issues. So I was like, okay, how do I have a book that lasts for 60 issues that can like be somebody's like I have.
What's your Y the Last Man? Yeah.
It's why, yeah, exactly. I can have Y the Last Man. Like I have every issue of Y the Last Man. I have the first 10 volumes of Chew.
Yep.
Preacher. Metropolitan, which
I feel the same way.
I have in order to have the career, I want to be like, how do I have half a shelf of just one project for somebody? And that's been the thing that has really changed for me in the past, really since about 2018. Instead of trying to check off these bucket list projects,
sure,
it's how do I either do an anthology that can basically sustain like my interest of doing different stuff, be in other anthologies that can sustain my interest in other stuff, or take all of these random disparate stuff that I like and throw them all into one book. So in my new secret project, like there's 4 main characters a book, basically. And like there's like one of them is having a horror story, and like one of them is having like a Regency romance story, and like they're all doing in the scope of this big book. And I learned that from George R. R. Martin, because I remember I'm not a huge fan of Song and Ice and Fire. I mean, I respect it, but like just not the writing that I enjoy. Sure. But what I love is that he basically, every main character is in a different like story. Like John is in an epic, is in an epic fantasy, like a traditional epic fantasy, like hero's journey, and Arya's in a coming of age story, and
Right.
and Sansa's in like this like political thriller, a tense political like, and they're all like in the same book, but he's made it so vast in scope that like everybody can have their favorite character, and they have some ones they don't like and have some ones they like more, but and then they have some ones maybe they just skip that chapter, but like somehow he was able to have a book that like literally has no magic in it, in like Cersei and Sansa's story, and stories that are full of magic like Dany and Jon's story, and somehow he smashed it together in like one thing that like people love. And so I've been very, very conscious of knowing that I like doing different stuff, but knowing I don't like to promote a whole lot of different things at one time. And how can I be like, okay, I want 20 books in this one series. I want 60 issues of this one thing. And it's got to be wide enough that like fantasy, sci-fi, horror, romance, like action adventure, all of the stuff that I love is on the table.
See, that's why I like doing mashups, and it's not quite as wide scale or as ambitious as you. And I think, I think hearing the way that you talk, I think it comes from, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it comes from both the fact that you've done novels as well, and the fact that you grew up in that heyday of Y the Last Man and Transmat and Sandman and the like. And for me, and I think some of it comes from my own confidence issues as a writer. I like throwing the peanut butter and the jelly together, because if I get stuck in one, I can switch to the other. But I'm still able to sort of write what feels like double the books to me. It's so interesting that you talk about you want to do 60 issues, whereas for me, I say this with all the love in the world. I see you as Christmas future. You were the one who was pioneering Kickstarter well before I was doing it. So I'm sure I'm going to come to your line of thinking probably sooner rather than later. Where I'm at right now, I get restless. And so like by the time that I finish a book, I'm so wiped. Then I'm like, okay, I got to do something else to cleanse my palate. And I think Spencer and Locke, it's interesting. I'm working on Spencer and Locke 3 right now. And, it's sometimes it feels like I'm kind of dancing on the head of a pin. And so that'll be my first trilogy. And, look, never say never. If somebody really wants more of any of my other books, I'm sure I can make it happen. But I kind of like the idea of just doing a few different things for now, making them all connect. So if you like Spencer and Locke, you might like the OZ. But sort of doing it differently enough that I keep energized, because it's like, I don't know. I try to write as much as I can, but I consider myself fairly lazy. Like I want my dessert immediately, and having a new thing out, it feels like dessert. Like I get to explore the characters in the world, and I don't feel constrained with what I've done before. And
that's the worst part. It's so bad. Like it's hard. It's worse in novels. But yes, Ghost of Christmas Past. Like I can tell you that like that was me. You might never get there, but that was me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was like, I'm never going to do more Ichabod. I'm never going to do more Katrina. And like, shocker, we're writing my third episode. We're in the middle of the third Ichabod. We're in the middle of, I've written 7 Katrina books, 7 Godsverse books, plus 2 graphic novels. So like, I said never say never, and I wrote a lot of standalones.
Yep.
The problem becomes like, you've been able to do it with like one, with Spencer and Locke, and a lot of the success you had with going to the chapel and the OZ, which we're going to talk about next. But like, it's so hard to get through like the ceiling to something that is culturally relevant.
Yeah.
And like trying to do it 50 times in a career is so hard that what ended up happening was, I had Ichabod and I had Katrina and I had some success right off the top. And suddenly, like, I was like, well, everything's just going to go that easily. And what I found was the next 20 projects that I did, just like they did not elevate. Like they just did not do that thing. And once I had like really 5 years later, and like literally still had the same 2 projects that had like broken through the public zeitgeist, and maybe you could say like Cthulhu is Hard to Spell up there as well.
Sure.
But like like suddenly I was like, well, why am I putting so much effort on all of these like single things when like I could just latch on to like these things that are already in the public zeitgeist and build them out, and like I know that people like these things from me. And some people, as I mentioned, like go down deeper to like my standalones or something, but like it's I think I was it was hubris. That was just like, well, the first thing I did, like the first book, like became successful, and the second one did even better. And then I was like, oh, none of these other things did anything though.
Sure.
Like, that was, and so it became a lot of just like looking back 5 years on and saying, well, I said I'd never do more Ichabod, but like,
sure, you know, although I, you know, for me, and granted, look, it's still pretty early on, so I'm still figuring it all out. Because like, look, you know, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody to know that like Going to the Chapel didn't do Spencer and Locke numbers, you know, and that was with having Spencer and Locke 2 be the lead in. We literally went straight from Spencer and Locke 2 to Going to the Chapel. We had 4 months worth of ads. But you know, it didn't do as well in the dollars and cents department, but I do think it had the intangible benefit of sort of drawing. For me, my philosophy is always, and this is why I always appreciate you pushing so hard on the newsletter front, because it's the same philosophy. You want to build a wider consensus. You want to invite more people to the table. You want to be able to perform that kind of outreach. And that's, you know, so having a different genre like Going to the Chapel, it would bring in people who might have looked at Spencer and Locke and immediately wrote it off, but now might have given it a chance because they liked Going to the Chapel so much. And I think that's the reason. I'm going to give you another good segue here. That's the reason why I went to Kickstarter.
So I want to talk about this because I've known about this project for a long time. I don't even know. It feels like 50 years, but it was probably like 3 months before like I didn't know which of the projects that it was, but I just knew it was coming. And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to know this is like I've loved your other work, but like this is the book that like I was like, oh, well, like you just named all of the things that I love in the world, and also your writing style. And so do you want to talk a little bit about the OZ, and then I'm going to gush about the preview that I read?
Yeah. So the OZ, the quick pitch is, what if Mad Max and the Hurt Locker took place in The Wizard of Oz? It reframes Dorothy Gale's killing of the Wicked Witch of the West in the original Wizard of Oz as something like a botched regime change. And so when Dorothy clicked her heels together and went back to Kansas, she unwittingly left Oz in this horrific power vacuum that spiraled into years of civil war. So the OZ picks up a generation later with her granddaughter, and who also is named Dorothy. This new Dorothy, however, she's an Iraq war veteran. She is, you know, she's disillusioned. She's really brought back some trauma from her time overseas. And, you know, she's really trying to put the pieces of her life together when she's swept up by a tornado and dropped into the war-torn land of Oz. So she's going to have to, you know, navigate her grandmother's former friends. She's going to have to confront her past if she hopes to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ.
Yeah, it reminds me of God. What was the book? The DMZ. DMZ.
Yeah.
Like like that was what I immediately thought of when I was reading the preview.
Yep.
But also, so like the pitch is great, but like I'm going to bring up a small moment, which like I thought was like the best part of the preview that I read, which was the girl a couple of pages in is like, she's talked about like her past in Iraq, and she goes in to see her grandmother, and you kind of like don't put it together until she talks about Toto.
Yeah.
And she's like, did you feed Toto? And the girl, the main character, Dorothy, is you're like, oh, well, that's her grandmother. It's just Dorothy Gale. It's like the original Dorothy Gale. Yeah. And she's like debating whether she should tell her again that like her dog is dead, or just like let her live in this like demented delusion. And in all of the preview, which like I know you do like big moments well.
Yeah,
what I think in your career has shown from Spencer and Locke to Going to the Chapel to the OZ is you've gotten better and better and better at doing these like small intimate moments well, and making them really matter in this overall scope of really big moments.
Thank you. That means a ton, because that is something that I've been trying to work on and trying to build. it's yeah, for me, I had to unlearn a lot of things to become a writer. Because when I first started, when I was really young, and I loved the idea of writing, and I hadn't really demystified it yet, I thought in terms of action sequences. And the problem is, I learned as I was in college and starting to write my own scripts, is writing a ton of action sequences gets boring. There's nothing to hold anybody's interest. It's these emotional moments that really capture somebody. And so having these little moments, these little hooks of sympathy or these hooks of engagement, or these hooks of relatable moments, that's what draws the audience in. I mean, like we were saying earlier, all storytelling is just the art of getting a complete stranger to care. And so I've worked on I've been trying to work on that as a storyteller, because I think that means I still love doing high concept work, but having those emotional beats is what keeps people in for the long haul.
Absolutely. The first Spencer and Locke is very much like turning everything up to 11, and like the whole story is just like it's 11, 11, 11. And I remember having this conversation with you. It's like, well, then you're already at 11, and the fourth issue just like takes it up to 20.
Yeah.
And like what I find so compelling in good writing, and when I talk to other writers, is it's like every sequence, every issue is like an arc, 3-act structure, and every scene is like a 3-act structure, and like and every piece has to have the rising moment and then the come down, so we can get sort of acclimated to normal, and then you go back up again, and then you come down, where like these, so you have these ways to make the action matter, and also these ways to make the characters matter. And it's the action that influences the character transformation, and it's not the other way around. And the most wonderful authors that I read really get that moment where it's not the action for the action's sake, it's action for the sake of character motivation and character growth. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, and I just feel like, the OZ in a lot of ways, I feel like it is a transition, and it's a building upon what I've done before. It is an evolution. I think just like Spencer and Locke and just like Chapel, we do focus a lot on trauma and kind of overcoming that with Dorothy's character. But I think we're able to really increase the scope and raise the stakes accordingly, because Spencer and Locke, if Locke can't get it together, he's dead in an alleyway. There's no, there's not a huge ripple effect. Chapel, if it all goes wrong, there might be a lot of dead people at this wedding, but this is like fighting for an entire country. Two of the things that I talked about with my co-creators, Ruben Rojas and Whitney Kogar, is, I said, think of what is the Mad Max version of Star Wars. Because Mad Max, it's got that grittiness, it's got that sort of desperation, because everybody's fighting in this desert war zone. But Star Wars, I really like, and it's something that kind of drew me to Oz as a place. There's that sense of scope, that sense of scale. There's so many different planets in Star Wars, and they each have their own individual palette and vibe and temperature and mood.
And so I'm going to do a thing that you just created Firefly.
Yeah. A little bit. Just keeping the grit, but also just being like, there's a whole world to explore in Oz. And so Dorothy's struggle doesn't just become for herself, although that is important. But, if she fails, a whole country, a whole world is going to be laid to waste. And I think we're also able to build on some of the themes a little bit beyond sort of the mainstay of trauma that I like to explore. But we're also able to talk about morality during wartime, because Dorothy, she's served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she has come back with trauma and survivor's guilt, and just kind of thinking, what was it all for? And so when she's in Oz, not only is it kind of, it's very, it stirs up some really terrible memories for her, but it's also a second chance to see if she can set things right. She's thinking, is there a way to escape this cycle of violence? Is there a way to make moral decisions when every choice you make can wind up with someone dead? And that's going to be her main struggle, especially when she's sort of given this burden of leadership that she doesn't even really want. But by virtue of who her grandmother was, everyone's going to be looking to her for answers.
Yeah, you know
And
what I
so,
love about what you're talking about is,
yeah,
as a creator, like most creators deal with the what and the how. Like, oh, I had this creative team and they're great. Like, this is what the book is about. But like, you really like are very good at dealing with like the why I should care and like why this matters and like
thank you.
why this is just not like another story.
Right.
And I want to point that out because like I
Thank
interview
you.
a lot of creators on this show, as you can
Mhm.
imagine, and like
Sure.
most of them are nowhere. Most of them overlook, and most creators on every Kickstarter that I ever back or like look
Mhm.
at, or whenever I talk to somebody, like they absolutely cannot make a compelling case as to why this is different or like the struggle that you're going for, like what the
Sure.
overarching scope of a story is,
Mhm.
and and I hope that people that are listening get that from this. Like you make a very compelling case, and maybe
Thank you.
that I'm sure that is in no small way why you launched to $18,000 within 24 hours, a
Yeah.
$6,000 goal.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at the dashboard right now. We're at 358% funded right now, and just on day two. It's mind blowing. I was so nervous going into this. I tried to manage my expectations, and every single expectation was completely blown away. And I believed in this book because I believed in my creative team, and it's so encouraging for me to see the rest of the world feels the same way. And I think that's a real. Not only is it a real vote of confidence, but this is the conversations that you and I have had. Is it's very empowering as a creator to take control of your own destiny. And I think it's not to say I'm not going to work with traditional publishers. I have books at traditional publishers right now, but being able to say like, hey, I'm going to release this thing on my timetable when I feel it's right. And if a publisher wants to pick it up and re-release it later, that's a conversation for another time. But I want to do something now that's going to give our Kickstarter backers the most bang for their buck. That's why we're doing double-sized issues for our 3 projected campaigns for this book. Because the issues that I had written them as 6, but they pair together so nicely. The OZ fits in a 3-act structure that I was like, oh, okay, like this is how we're going to do it. It really emboldened me to do Kickstarter because we can offer the book in a way that's at maximum value, but still gives us the flexibility of frequency to not kill my creative team. So I'm blown away. Couldn't be happier.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know I tried to get you to manage the expectations before this campaign started. And like, I think I still like stand by that. Like, if you have no data, like you should not like be shooting for the moon until you know, because like, in fairness, there's one campaign a month, maybe one campaign every couple months that like does the thing that you did. And like, even by really established creators that like can do that thing that like just like catch lightning in a bottle and like hit $20,000 in like 2 days. But like on the other side of it, like how good do you feel right now?
I feel amazing. It's equal parts amazing and exhausted. Because I won't be able to rest if I'm not doing a million different things to promote this across all 30 days. I got to learn that real quick. But yeah, I mean, I feel incredible. I feel empowered. I'm so excited that this book is going to come out the way that I envision it, which has always been the goal. And working with a team that is as creative and amazing as Ruben Rojas and Whitney Kogar and DC Hopkins, I feel like the sky's the limit for this book. And I even though we were just talking how I was saying I hate sequels and I never want to do sequels, I mean, this first 2 days has certainly gotten me thinking. While our 3 Kickstarter campaigns are self-contained, I've written the series already. It's already done. I always try to write with another idea in my back pocket.
Well,
so,
your pedigree has multiple stories in it. There are 12, I believe, 12 or 16 Oz stories. So, and I believe Frank just wanted to write 1, 2 at the beginning, and like 1 became 2, and 2 became 5, and 5 became 10, and It's a wonderful world, and one of my favorite movies of all time is still Return to Oz.
Yeah, love it. I love it. It's one of my favorites. A nice dark remix of everything. That's my jam, man.
Absolutely. Okay, so as we're coming to the close,
Sure.
I want to give you one more chance to pitch the book.
Yeah.
Give them the reason that they should go check it out now. Besides the fact that it just like skyrocketed to you over 500 backers now, probably.
We're at 558 backers right now.
Man, that's incredible. So and then give us the one piece of advice you wish you either wish you had heard or want people to leave this conversation with, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure. If you like Mad Max, if you like The Old Guard, if you like Fables, if you like Sheriff of Babylon, or if you just like my previous work on Spencer and Locke, you're gonna love the OZ. It's a story, that's got tons of action, but tons of heart. We work really hard to make sure that this story is not shock for shock value's sake. We work really hard to try to justify this story narratively. And working with the team I'm working with, you're going to see from page one that it's magic. And I would say, as far as advice for creators, the two bits of advice that I would give is one, just don't be afraid to advocate for your work, whether you're selling at a con or pitching it to a publicity outlet. Your team depends on you. So you really want to pound the pavement as hard as you can. And secondly, we're all in this together. And that's been the biggest thing that I've had to really internalize during this Kickstarter campaign, is that our success has come from, the friends that I've made in the industry who have been willing to shout us out. And, having people like Scott Snyder or Gail Simone, or Alex Packnadel, just to name three people who are willing to just endorse the book, or Mark Russell, that I think has been instrumental to our campaign. And I think, it's not to say that, I have 10 years in the comics journalism experience, so I know these people, but you can do this with your peers. You can do this with the people you're coming up with. If you don't know anybody in this industry that you're coming up with, that's what Twitter's for. Meet them, be friends with them. When COVID ends, go to cons, meet them. But I think being in the trenches with like-minded individuals, that's the only way that we survive in this business. It's by supporting each other and just being sounding boards for everybody else.
Awesome, man. And I know that you are on Twitter and Facebook and all of the other places, but I will give a pitch to your newsletter, which is quite entertaining and has one of my favorite names, the Pep Talk.
Yeah, Pep Talks. It's you can subscribe now at bit.ly/Pep News. You can also back the OZ at bit.ly/the OZ Comic.
Awesome, man. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So that was my interview with David Pepose. If you enjoyed that, go check out the OZ on Kickstarter now. And while you're there, check out Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter Volume 2. This is my most beloved book. It's about a psychopath that escapes a mental asylum and becomes a monster hunter, but doesn't know if he's killing monsters, humans, or it's all in his head the whole time. The first volume came out in 2014. This is the first new volume since then, and we are currently in production on Volume 3. And if this campaign goes well, then we are going to see a Volume 4, and who knows, maybe even more than that. So go and check out the OZ and Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter Volume 2 right now. And if you like this show, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. It's the best way for people to know that this is a quality show and for us to know that we're on the right track. All right, that's it for me. I will see you next time.